Hello, party people, and welcome to the 5th episode of Season 4 of Law Candor, the podcast wholly devoted to pursuing the legal technology revolution. I am Bill. I'm here with Rob. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we have a great discussion on managing cybersecurity in eDiscovery, something that is at the top of everybody's mind these days. And to take us through that is the CIO of Lighthouse, Dave Kuhl. Dave is fantastic on the subject. I think you guys are really going to enjoy that portion of the podcast, that interview portion of the podcast. But for now, before we get there, we have to look at
Sightings of Radical Brilliance.
This is our favorite portion of the program where we bring you sightings in our industry, acts of sheer genius, things that we've come across that we think you guys will find interesting. Rob, what do we have today?
Well, I think since we're talking about cybersecurity, it only makes sense to incorporate that into our theme today. And I came across an article on CNET recently called Dumping Passwords Can Improve Your Security, Really, by Stephen Shanklin. And it actually was really fascinating. And I love the way this article starts. 2 words, passwords suck. And all of us sort of deal with this on a daily basis, having to remember the dozens and dozens of passwords that turn out to be not great and really just not a great way to protect ourselves. Stephen talks about technology that is sort of coming online these days. It's called FIDO, or Fast Internet Online. This is technology, think of it as like a security key, kind of like the equivalent of a house key that you then combine with some kind of biometric data. So maybe it's like something I plug into my USB port, and then I use my thumbprint, and that authenticates my identity in a way that's much better than a password and something I don't have to remember.
Yeah, it's funny, right? I mean, you're already getting a glimpse of this with iPhones, right? The ability to pick up my phone, it recognizes my face, I log in. There's also the ability to, when I go to a website, I can, from my iPhone, I could go to log in, and it could if I've saved my password, it can authenticate me by my face as well. So it's just that next step that Fast Identity Online or FIDO is bringing to us. And listen, when I first read the title of the article, I thought no passwords safer. How can that be? But it's true. I mean, it's absolutely true. It's probably the safest bet. One of the quotes in the article that I thought was interesting, it says, a password is something you know, a device is something you have, and biometrics is something that you are. We're moving to something that you have and that you are, and basically away from things that you just know, something that you have to remember, or something that somebody can figure out. If it's something that you have and something that you are, a lot more difficult to crack.
Yeah, agreed. This is definitely technology that will, at least in my opinion, that will catch on. It makes a lot of sense. I hate passwords. I hate having to, look at my secret file of dozens of passwords that, I know is going to fall into someone's hands at some point. This is, there's a better way to live for sure.
Yeah, I mean, your kid's name, their birthday, and your favorite pet, and the street you grew up on. I mean, there's only so many things. I mean, it's only so many things that you're going to remember. I know that Apple now has the encrypted passwords that they suggest for you. But if you're not fully Mac compatible and you're just have an iPhone but not a Mac computer, that doesn't help you because you have to remember some 17-digit thing. This is great. I'm looking forward to this. I'm also this would be great for someone like my wife who hasn't changed her password in 15 years. So I'm sure she's getting hacked every day. Knock on wood. Something like this I think will save her as well. Really interesting read. I like the way this is going, and the future of the password industry. I should say the ability to log on industry. It's interesting to see where that's going.
Totally agree, and I think it dovetails well with today's session with Dave Kuhl on cybersecurity.
Yeah, David was great. You guys will enjoy this one.
Dave, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Maybe could you start things off by just sharing a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure, Rob. Delighted to be here. So I guess where I would start is I've been programming computers since I was a teenager and kind of grew up with the industry and really enjoyed it. And it's been fantastic to see the advances over the last few years. From a professional perspective, I've had the privilege of working at Microsoft, Expedia, Alaska Airlines, some great companies before I came to Lighthouse. And then at Lighthouse, we've got an excellent mixture of systems, data, security. I've always been passionate about cybersecurity. So for me, it's been a great journey.
Yeah, Dave, easily the coolest guest we've had on this podcast. No, well, actually, pun intended there, my friend. Seriously, though, give it. Let's start. We like to what we start to do here. What we like to do here on the podcast is start at that high level and then drill down into something that's really pertinent and what's going on sort of today. So, can you give us a high level overview of the recent complexities around managing cybersecurity today?
Sure, that's a great question. So, for sure, it has gotten more complicated. And if you go back to the early days, it was all about do you have a virus scanner on your system and make sure that everybody's password is strong. And each year, we've seen escalation in terms of the capabilities and sophistication of the threats. We've seen more organization, which is you would have individual bad actors or hackers. Now we're seeing teams, some of them government sponsored, some of them not. And it's become an ecosystem. You can literally go to a website, you can download hacker tools, you can apply those, you can see which ones work, which ones don't. And so what we've been seeing is more threats. The other thing that we've been seeing as two of the biggest threats are phishing, which I think everybody's familiar with, which is, hey, if you see suspicious emails, don't click on those links. That is the worst thing you can do. The second one, which has been more concerning, is the uptick in what we call ransomware or malware. And this is the case where you get something on your systems, you can get it infected, and you can get to a point where a company is literally held for ransom to be able to take infected files and have somebody decrypt them for them so you can have access to your data again.
And Dave, in that sort of like ransomware scenario, which seems like maybe like the worst case scenario for a company like ours, what's the typical response? Like, how do you get out of that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple of things. Number one, the best place to be is don't get in that situation in the first place. But if you do find yourself in that situation, generally with the assistance from local law enforcement and security experts, you've got to painfully go through, figure out how far that infection has spread, how you're going to go to backups, rebuild systems, make sure that it hasn't gotten to data. Or if it has gotten to data, you may be in an unfortunate situation where you've had like a massive failure and you literally either have to pay the ransom or literally rebuild things from scratch. So that's a situation we really try super hard not to be in. And this is one of those places where an ounce of prevention is worth multiple pounds of cure. You don't want to be in that type of situation.
So take us through some of the lessons that you've learned, either yourself through some of the challenges that you've mentioned, either that you've experienced personally throughout your career, or that you've lessons learned in the there, but for the grace of God go I kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. And we have seen an increase across the industry, in terms of attacks, companies, organizations that have dealt with this. The things that we've seen that are good lessons to learn is, first of all, going back to that education and awareness. Make sure that social engineering, phishing, make sure that you've got good policies in place, strong passwords, appropriate segmentation of data and access. And then the place where I feel like we've learned the deepest lesson, and we continue to learn every day, because literally across the industry, you have attacks that occur every single day, is that you have to up your game. You really have to raise the bar. And a lot of the current virus scanning that we've got kind of looks backwards if you think about it, which is if you've had this experience on your home computer where what you've got is every so often you get an updated virus file. And what that is these are signatures and go look for that. Well, that's super useful if somebody discovered this virus like a month ago and now they're publishing it. But what if it's a virus that people are not familiar with? What if it's sophisticated malware that kind of assembles itself from different files that have been infected and creates something that doesn't have a good signature? And that's been one of the deepest lessons we've learned, which is just virus scanning isn't good enough anymore. And where we've moved is for a premium perspective, you've really got to take a look at what's happening at the individual file level. And it's not only what's going on inside of files, but what is the expected behavior. If you have something that is a file that should be just sitting there, and all of a sudden you're starting to notice that its attributes are changing, or you're starting to see a process execution that gets traced back to this, This is the place where we've learned lessons, which is being deeper in terms of our scanning, being proactive and preventative, but then also literally looking at actively what's happening across all file types. So the sophistication of these attacks has just been incredible.
And it seems, Dave, like that one of the, I guess, the main entry points, for malware is through phishing. And you mentioned before that, prevention plays a big part. For phishing specifically, what can companies do to protect themselves?
A couple of things. I mean, I think a lot of folks have got good discipline, particularly if they're using Microsoft 365 in setting their phishing filters high. There's also the individual awareness and training, but then also it's making sure that you're segmenting where your users have access from your client data. So, in the rare case that you do get a phishing attempt, somebody clicks on something by accident and something gets infected at like a laptop or a desktop level, that doesn't intersect with your data center. It doesn't intersect with the LANs and the setup that you have for client data. And that's another place where we spend a lot of time, which is making sure we've got good segmentation and compartmentalization. And that's certainly a good practice.
And then you mentioned before, better to not get yourselves in these situations rather than try to fight it afterwards, especially you mentioned with regard to ransomware. So looking forward, how do you get yourself ahead of these issues before they hit?
That is a great question. And that's one of the things we faced back in 2018, which is as we were seeing these threats and the sophistication kind of escalated, we realized that we needed a premium security partner. And one of the challenges that you have is you have to literally be on your toes and aware of this 24 by 7. And for many companies, you can't afford the investment and expertise and the personnel it takes for that. And so you've got to figure out who you're going to partner with. And then you've got to take a look at the methodology. And kind of as we talked about, we wanted to make sure that we were going with a provider that was forward looking, that was using all of the best in machine learning and artificial intelligence to take a look at what was happening at file levels. And so as folks are looking at this across the industry, that's the thing I would encourage, which is, take a look at what you're doing internally, but also take a look at who are the partners, who are the folks that you're counting on to work with you to preserve data and to defend. And that's what makes your prevention very effective.
Just one quick follow up on that. We're in a growth by acquisition industry, right? And sometimes you'll buy another company because it adds something to your portfolio of services. Sometimes you'll buy another company because you want a bigger footprint in the industry, right? And you're buying that company's business. And we Lighthouse bought Discovia 3 years ago, and that happens more. In some companies, they're just growth by acquisition strategy. How important is it when you go through that process to not only have your own security in order, but then to vet the security of the company that you're acquiring?
That is a great point. It is super important. And the other thing is that you have great companies that come together as a result of mergers and acquisitions. And you have to take a look at what is the better security approach. And obviously, your first order of business is to make sure, regardless of which company had the better security approach, take the one that's at the higher level and apply that. And then, second of all, as you generally find, there are synergies that come out of any merger or acquisition. You've got great teams of people coming together that generates new thinking, new platforms, new data, new customers. And then as those customers come on board, you take that as an opportunity to up your game and continuously improve. And coming back to your earlier question about learning, that is one of the most important traits in cybersecurity. You can never for a second rest on your laurels. You can never for a second assume that the threats you faced yesterday are the threats for today. And so anytime you bring things together, it's taking a look at what have I got, what's the best I can do, what can I learn, and how can I make it better for tomorrow?
Now, Dave, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. I don't think there's anyone in our industry or probably in the world right now that isn't thinking about these issues and the best way to mitigate it. Maybe just to take some of our key points from the conversation. Ransomware and phishing, big on the threat list for us right now. Also that, the attempts at, implanting malware are getting more and more sophisticated as time goes on. Prevention is for sure a lot better than mitigation. and trying to fix these things once they happen. And, especially if you're a small or a medium-sized company, kind of going it alone is tough these days. And, a key strategy is to find a good partner that can help bring that expertise. It's been a great conversation, and I can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Yeah, Dave, this has been one of the better podcasts that we've done, just because of it, how relevant it is to every company, regardless of industry. But certainly, it was really awesome job. This has been an epic podcast. Thanks.
It has been a pleasure. Thanks, guys.